The laugh she let out wasn't the polite kind people use at parties. It cracked across the room like something sharp cutting through the music and chatter. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward us, toward me, as Brielle lifted the small wrapped box between two fingers the way you might hold something sticky you didn't want to touch. What a ridiculous gift, Mom. You've always been useless. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The only sound was the clinking of someone setting a glass down too quickly. Then she shoved the box into my hands, pushing the edge against the chocolate cake I'd spent half the night making. The frosting smeared across my blouse, warm and wet, sliding down toward my elbow. A smear of it landed on the floor. No one bent to clean it. 80 guests stood there, neighbors, co-workers, people I'd watched grow up, and not one of them said a word. Caleb stood near the table holding a glass of champagne, like he didn't know where he was. When I looked at him, he didn't look back. He only shifted his weight and stared at the candles flickering beside him. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. I placed the cake on the table, trying not to look at the dent in its side. My hands smelled like sugar and shame. Someone whispered, someone coughed, but no one stepped forward. I took a breath, smoothed the frosting on my blouse as best I could, and walked toward the door. Outside, the cold hit my skin instantly. The music stayed behind the walls, muffled and distant, like it belonged to another life. I stood on the porch, staring out at the line of cars along the street, trying to understand how a night meant for celebration had carved something open inside me. I didn't wait for Caleb to come after me. I knew he wouldn't. I stepped off the porch, the frost crunching under my shoes, and headed toward the place I had always gone when I needed quiet, because I would need quiet to decide what came next. I hadn't bought myself new shoes in nearly a year. Every time I thought about replacing the scuffed soles or the worn heels, I'd remember that Caleb's birthday was coming. He used to love watches. In college, he wore one until the band snapped clean. Best brand ever, he used to say. That memory had followed me into every thrift shop and antique listing I searched for months until I finally found a restored one, still ticking, still solid, like time hadn't gotten the best of it. I cleaned it, gently polished the band, and wrapped it in silver paper. The cake was easier. My hands knew every step of the recipe. Eggs, sugar, dark chocolate, a pinch of salt, my husband's old trick. The same cake we'd made together for Caleb's birthday since he was 5. That cake had once made him giggle with a mouth full of frosting. Now it stained my blouse and floor and meant nothing. After I left the party, I drove home in silence. I didn't even take the back roads like I usually did to avoid traffic. I didn't care who saw the mess I'd become. I opened the door to my quiet kitchen and set the ruined cake down without looking at it. Later, I iced the bruise on my wrist. It had bloomed dark where the edge of the pan had struck me when Brielle shoved the gift into my hands. My coat still smelled like the frosting I used to make with love. That smell used to mean celebration. Now it clung to me like something rotting. I checked my phone once before bed. Nothing. No missed calls. No texts. Not even a message from Caleb asking if I made it home. I placed the wrapped watch gently in the drawer next to my bed, unopened. It wasn't meant for anyone else, and somehow, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, sat with my coffee in silence, and opened my laptop to check the emergency account. The one I had nearly forgotten still existed. The numbers didn't lie. The emergency account still had my name on it, same routing number, same login. I hadn't touched it in years, ever since Caleb got married and insisted they could manage their own expenses. We'd opened it when he first moved out, a safety net he could fall back on while finding work. I left it open, out of habit, not trust. Scrolling through the statements, my eyes caught on charge after charge that made my chest tighten. Luxury wine deliveries, spa packages in Portland, designer strollers that cost more than my old car. It didn't look like survival, it looked like celebration. And not the kind anyone had invited me to. Then I saw it, nestled between two PayPal charges. Loan disbursement, $42,000 cosigner Lenora Viscari. My heart skipped. I clicked through trembling, my name, my social. A squiggled signature that looked close, but not mine. I stared at it, willing it to disappear. But it didn't. They'd used me. Quietly. Thoroughly. I drove to their house that afternoon. Caleb opened the door surprised, but not worried. "Mom, hey, what's up?" he asked, stepping aside. I walked past him straight into the kitchen and turned to face him. "There's a loan? $42,000. My name is on it. And that's not my signature." He didn't flinch. "Mom, we needed it. It's not like you're hurting for money. It's all staying in the family." I couldn't speak. I'd given him my name, my backing, my everything, and now it was just a tool, a key he used without knocking. I left without saying more. If I stayed, I'd cry. If I cried, I'd break. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table, hands clenched, and reached for the drawer I hadn't opened since the week his father died. Inside was a folder still sealed that Miriam had drawn up for me years ago, just in case something like this ever happened. I opened it finally, ready to read the fine print. I hadn't planned to go. The folder was still sitting on the kitchen counter half read, but I needed air. I gathered a few family photos I'd found while cleaning out my old chest pictures of Caleb as a boy. My husband teaching him to ride a bike, holidays we once spent laughing around cramped tables. I thought maybe they'd want them. Maybe it would remind them of something. When I pulled into their driveway, the first thing I saw was the BMW SUV gleaming in the sun like a trophy. Not just clean new, brand new. The same car Caleb said they couldn't afford when he asked me to co-sign a loan for a used vehicle. A practical family car, he'd called it. He hadn't even bothered to cover the lie. I walked to the door and rang the bell, holding the photos in both hands. A moment later, the door cracked open, just enough for Brielle to peer through. "You can just leave those," she said, not smiling, cradling the baby on her hip and scrolling her phone with the other hand. I hesitated, then handed the envelope through the gap. Her nails brushed mine as she took it, and I saw she hadn't even looked up. Not at me, not at the pictures. I stepped back, but something near the door caught my eye. Slung over the arm of the porch bench was my husband's leather briefcase, the one he carried every day for 20 years. Worn in the corners, soft from use, still faintly smelling of cedar and old notebooks. Caleb had once sworn he'd give it to his son when he was old enough. Now it was a diaper bag. The straps stretched with baby wipes and teething rings. I turned without a word, walked past the BMW and got in my car. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. When I got home, I slid the folder back in front of me, flipped to the tab labeled Joint Assets, and made a list. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Miriam's number. The steel drawer in the back of my closet hadn't been touched in months. It was wedged beneath an old quilt, the key still looped on a ribbon I wore around my neck some winters. I sat on the edge of the bed and unlocked it, feeling the weight of things I'd buried more carefully than I realized. On top was the house deed. My name alone. Caleb had asked once about transferring it for security. He said in case something happens. I'd nodded, said I'd think about it, then never followed through. Now I was grateful for every second I hesitated. Beneath the deed was the power of attorney paperwork, revoked last winter. I remembered the awkward conversation with Miriam in her office, the way she gently suggested I protect myself just in case. I had agreed, unsure why. It felt unnecessary then. Now it felt prophetic. At the bottom was a sealed envelope. Thick. Heavy. My handwriting across the front in case of emergency. I held it for a while, thumb resting over the seal pulse, tapping quietly against the edge. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I laid it all out on the bed. Every document, every signature, every choice I'd once made in quiet faith. I'd believed that if I kept showing up, kept supporting, kept baking cakes and wiring money and offering rides, they'd see me, choose me, respect me. But I saw it now. Silence hadn't bought me peace. It had bought them space to push further. When Caleb forged my name, when Brielle laughed in my face when no one called, I wasn't shocked. I was finally ready to stop pretending I didn't already know. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the drawer, and stood with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. Then I went downstairs, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and opened my laptop to check the account balances one more time, because this time I wouldn't be ignoring the numbers. I'd be subtracting. Miriam didn't ask questions when I walked into her office. She simply closed her planner, folded her hands, and waited for me to speak. I handed her the folder with the documents from the drawer. My fingers trembled, but my voice didn't. I told her about the forged loan the house Caleb wanted, transferred the account they drained like it had no owner. She didn't blink, just nodded and said, "We'll begin with the essentials." By the end of the hour, we'd filed 3 formal actions. First, we halted any pending transfers tied to my home. Second, we opened a case to contest the $42,000 loan with documentation proving my signature had been forged. Third, we froze every shared account linked to my name, past or present. Then came the harder part. I drove home, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the dealership number for almost 20 minutes. It was the one Caleb had given me when he asked for help with the used car. I still had the paperwork in my filing cabinet. I called. I explained that I was the legal co-owner of the BMW SUV and that I was no longer authorizing its use. They said they'd flag it for recovery. I didn't want revenge. I wanted control over what was already mine. 2 days later, it began. Caleb called me 3 times in a row. I didn't answer. The 4th call was from an unknown number. I let it ring out. His card had been declined at a gas station. Brielle's subscription boxes, baby gear, cosmetics, wine stopped arriving, and the dealership left a message confirming the vehicle was scheduled for repossession. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. For the first time in years, the silence around me wasn't empty. It was mine. That evening, I took a slow walk around the block. When I returned, I saw the unopened envelope still resting on my side table. This time, I reached for it. Not out of fear, but because I was ready to read what I'd written to myself, when I still believed no one else would protect me. The dealership worked faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, they confirmed the paperwork was in motion. The BMW SUV that Caleb paraded around town had never left my legal ownership. All those months he pretended it was his triumph, his success, his proof that he was building a better life. None of it had been real. I had signed the loan because he said he needed a safe family vehicle. I believed him. I didn't ask questions. I didn't imagine I would one day need to. On the 3rd morning, I received a short voicemail from the dealership. The vehicle had been recovered from the edge of his office lot. No drama, no confrontation, just a tow truck and a clipboard. I listened to the message twice, then set my phone down and made myself a cup of tea. My hands were steady. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store to restock my pantry. I didn't expect to see Brielle there, but life has a way of putting truth directly in your path. She stood under the awning near the cart, return a toddler balanced on one hip. Her hair was unstyled, her face without the usual layers. She never stepped outside without her phone clenched tightly in her hand. No shining SUV behind her, just empty pavement. When she spotted me, her expression twisted anger. First, then confusion, then something I recognized from the night of the party, entitlement, wounded by consequence. Her jaw tightened, as if she expected me to stop, to defend myself, to apologize for the inconvenience of making her life reflect reality for once. I didn't. I walked straight past her, my cart rattling against the concrete. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then the toddler fussed, and she shifted her grip, muttering under her breath. I didn't turn around to listen. Inside the store, the cool air washed over me, and a strange calm settled into my chest. It wasn't victory. It was clarity, the kind that comes only after a long stretch of being unheard. When I stepped back outside with my groceries, the spot where she'd stood was empty, and my phone was already buzzing with Caleb's name on the screen. The moment I stepped out of the store, my phone buzzed again. Caleb's name pulsed across the screen like a warning. I let it ring once, twice, then finally answered. The wind carried his breathless voice before he even formed words. Mom? Brielle said, everything's frozen. The car's gone. What's happening? He sounded panicked, like a man waking to find the ground missing beneath him. I leaned against the trunk of my car, letting the silence stretch before I spoke. I asked for respect, I said slowly. You handed me insult and forged papers. He exhaled sharply, the sound cracking at the edges. Mom, come on. This isn't just about us anymore. We have a baby. We need that car. We need those accounts. Can't you just shift things back? Shift things back, as if my boundaries were furniture he could rearrange whenever it suited him. He kept talking, kept pleading, just until we figure things out. Brielle's a mess. I'm trying to keep everything together. You know how it is. Please, Mom. I closed my eyes. I remembered packing lunches before dawn, skipping dinners so he could eat enough, walking miles when the car broke down so he'd never miss school. All the invisible choices I'd made so he could grow without feeling how tight things once were. I gave you food I didn't eat, I said quietly. I gave you time I didn't have, and you stood there while your wife mocked me in front of strangers. He didn't respond. The silence swallowed us both. When he finally whispered, I didn't know what to say. It was too small and too late to matter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself again. I simply said, you made your choices. Now I'm making mine, and ended the call. My phone vibrated again as I put it into my purse, but I didn't look at the screen. I drove home in the fading afternoon light. 2 mornings after the call, I found a small package sitting neatly against my front door. No return address. No handwritten label. Just my name printed in block letters as if whoever sent it couldn't bring themselves to try anything more personal. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. For a long moment, I just stared at it, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the space around me still warm from the sun coming through the window. Finally, I tore the tape and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was something I hadn't seen in years, Caleb's old college watch. The one with the scratched face and worn leather band he used to wear every day, back when he still asked me to sew the buttons on his shirts. It had been cleaned. The face shone like it had been professionally polished. The band replaced the clasp, fixed. It looked almost new, like time had been rewound. Beneath it lay a small, glossy photograph. Caleb, at 8 years old, cheeks puffed as he blew out candles on a chocolate cake. My cake. His father's recipe. His smile so wide, it tilted his whole face, Dimple's deep eyes squeezed shut with joy. I let the picture rest in my hand for a moment, tracing the edge with my thumb. 1,000 birthdays lived in that image. 1,000 choices. 1,000 pieces of love I had given without keeping score. I placed the watch on the bookshelf in the living room, next to the framed photo of my husband. I slid the picture in behind it, leaning it so only I would see it whenever I walked past. I didn't text Caleb. I didn't call. I didn't send the package back. I just stood there, letting the air settle, letting the quiet do what it needed to do. Then I closed the glass cabinet door, the latch clicking softly, sealing the watch and the photograph inside. Somewhere safe, somewhere still mine. Spring came quietly. Soft rain pattered against the windows, and the air carried the clean scent of new beginnings. I stood at the curb one morning with a screwdriver in hand and replaced the mailbox plaque with a fresh one. My full name centered and clear, Lenora Viscari. No family, no unit, no shared anything. Just mine. Inside, I painted the kitchen a warm, soft shade that reminded me of early sunlight. I cleared the clutter from the counters. I stuck the house deed on the fridge door with a magnet shaped like a pear. Something my husband once gave me on a whim after a road trip stop in Grants Pass. Every time I opened the fridge, it greeted me like a quiet promise: you stayed, and it's still yours. I didn't invite anyone over. I didn't post anything online. But I pulled out the recipe card anyway. The one stained in the corner from cocoa powder, the ink faded from use. I baked the cake exactly as I always had, slowly, deliberately letting the smell fill the house. My hands moved without thinking, muscle memory carrying me through. That night, I sat at the small table by the window with one slice of cake and a cup of tea. I didn't light a candle. I didn't make a toast. But when I took that first bite, it tasted different, richer somehow, softer. Not because the ingredients had changed, but because I finally understood I hadn't made it for anyone else. Not this time. It was mine. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder if Caleb would reach out again. I didn't wait for the doorbell or the mail. For once, I let the silence stay as long as it needed. It didn't feel empty anymore. Before bed, I passed the bookshelf and paused in front of the cabinet. The watch was still there. The photo, too. I didn't open the door, I just looked at it. Nodded once and turned off the light. Then I walked upstairs and slept with both arms wrapped around the quiet I had finally learned how to keep.